You know what time it is? It's tool time! Alright, on today's episode we are talking about the tape measure. So the tape measure is probably the most used universal tool in all of industrial industry, construction industry, right? Whether or not you're a carpenter, a plumber, electrician, or you're a project manager, if you're on a job site, you're walking around with one of these on your hips because you're always got to take a measurement, you always got to read a plan, you got to figure out the details, whatever it is, you're always using one of these. And so if you want to be successful in a trade, one of the first things you want to do is just master the skill of reading a tape measure. A tape measure is a pretty simple tool. It's a spring, basically, that wheels up into a little plastic box, and on this metal spring you have all your measurements. Alright, so each tape is a little bit different. They have different markings on them by a little bit, but for the most part, everything is the same. Your foot markings are going to have some kind of box around them. And then every 16 inches, you'll have a little red box around them. And so that's for layout purposes to make it easy, so you don't have to do math. You know every 16 inches, which is standard layout for most construction, is in red letters. So it makes it really easy to mark out. And so some features and tapes that you want to look for to make sure you're getting a good tape. Make sure it fits in your hand good. Each tape is a little different. I like this Milwaukee one. It fits really good in my hand. Some people like different shapes. Fat Max is very popular, and some people like this one has it stays out and you have to push the button to make it come back in. Whereas this one, it automatically comes back in, but there's a lock to prevent it. So there's just different features. And so you just want to find a tape that is good for you. Another reason why I like this one is it has a little finger stop. I just think that's a cool feature. Instead of having to push the lock down to stop the blade, I can just use my finger to pinch it. But even if you don't, all you have to do is hold your hand like that and you can pinch it with your forefinger and thumb. And so it's not that big of a feature, but I just think it's pretty neat. Another thing you want to look out for is the stand out. And so when you're out in the field on the job site, lots of times you have to hook something that's kind of out of reach. And so you want a tape measure that you can stick it out pretty far so you can hook onto something while you're standing. Say you're on a ladder or you just don't want to walk all the way over there, you can hook it and pull it without having to walk all the way over there or have two people to help you hold your tape. And so that's called a tape stand out. And so most tapes, good tapes now, you're looking at least 11 feet. And so that's pretty much what you need to get the job done. There's some tapes that are going up to like 13, 14 feet. But again, if you're around 10 foot, it'll help you get the job done. So you're looking for a tape. There's also different lengths. This one's a 25 footer. I think all these are 25s, but you can get a 16 foot. You get different lengths. For trim carpentry, I carry around a 16 foot. When I'm framing, I carry around a 25. I know guys who carry around 35s. It's all basically the task that you're doing. Make sure you get the right tape for the job.
So here we have a basic tape measure. And so, again, little feature like I showed you before, it has this cool little finger stop. And so when you pull your tape out, you can pinch it here and that stops it from coming back in. And then you can let it slide slowly. All right, so tape measures are basically a big spring wound up in a plastic case. When you pull it up, it wants to spring back. All right, so that's a basic feature. Tape measures all have a lock of some kind, which usually is just a slide this way, like this. And so what that does, you do it and now the tape is locked, it won't come back in. You can unlock it and it'll slide back in. All right, so the markings on a tape measure. So when looking at a tape, you're gonna see a bunch of different markings, right? Let me find 16. So within this, you can see 1 foot marks. On tape measures, usually are marked with black boxes. So every foot is going to tell you 1 foot, and then also it's going to give you that inch measurement as well, but it's going to be within a black box. All right, so now every 16 inches, you're going to see these red boxes. And so 16 inches is when you're doing layout. You'll learn more about that later, but all these red boxes are for 16-inch layout. So every 16 inches, so 16, 32, 48, and here you can see combination, a red box and a 4-foot box. So those are your basic things, the colors you're going to be seeing. And so this is when you're doing your layout, you need to do things every 16 inches on center. And so what this is doing is it makes you, so you don't have to do the math. You just know, look for the red boxes and you are good to go. Right? And so that's what the red markings are for. So then another little dot, if you look carefully, here on 19 and a little bit less than 3/8, you see these little black diamonds. Again, no one really uses those, but it's another way to lay out. And so if you see those little dots, that's for the same purpose of doing layouts. And so that's the basic markings of your tape. And one more thing before I put the tape away is on the end of a tape measure. If you see this part moves, it wiggles, right? And so that should happen. If you have a tape that it doesn't wiggle on the end, you want to throw that away because it's going to be inaccurate. And so the point is, think about it. You have this piece of metal, which is almost a 16th inch thick, not quite. And so what this does is if you're pulling on a board, your zero starts on this backside of the metal, right? Because you're pulling. So if you're pulling, you want the zero to be on this side. But let's say you're pushing in, you want it to move. So if you're pushing against something, your zero is on this side. And so you're pushing against it. And so that's why this thing wiggles. Just that little bit is to take into account the width of this metal depending on if you're pulling or if you're pushing against, because you want to change your zero reference line. So in using your tape measure, what you're going to do is you're going to hook it on the edge, and then I like to lean mine up on the side here, and so you can get a measurement. And so if you see, this is reading 14 and 3/16. And so when you're using a tape measure to mark, I'm going to pull from the other side just for example. So you hook the edge of your board, you pull it, and let's say I want to mark something at 12 inches. So whenever you mark something, for the most part in construction, if the mark doesn't matter, you aren't working with a finished material, you want to give yourself a nice crow's foot. You don't want to just do a little line like this. You want to make sure if anyone comes and sees what you're doing, they know exactly where your mark starts. So let's say I want to do 12 inches just to be easy. So 1 foot. I'm going to put one line. I'm going to put my pencil right on the line and do one mark. And now I'm going to do again on the same mark and do another. So now everyone knows when they see this, this is the point to be measured to. Because the problem is, let's just say I put one line. We're going to do 15 inches this time. If I just do one line, and say someone else walked up and wanted to do the same measurement or make the cut, how do they know if this is the point or if this is the point? They'll never know. So that's why, whenever possible, always give yourself, it's called a crow's foot. So you're going to put one line, two line. When handling a tape measure, there's some little tips and tricks to do, and it just takes getting used to how to make sure it doesn't flop around. Because let's face it, you don't want to look like this guy. When you're using a tape measure, again, you're just going to get used to different ways to make sure when you're pulling it out, you want to keep it nice and stiff. You don't want it to flop around so it'll snap on you like that. You got to do smooth motions. And so say you want to get into a corner. You bend it this way and you can slide it into a corner. And if you're hooking your measurement to pull, you got to make sure you maintain constant pressure. So if you hook it on an edge, you have to make sure you're pulling really tight or it's going to want to flop up around on you. So you're doing it, make sure you get pressure and pull on it real tight. As you're moving across, when you walk away, you don't lose that connection on the end. So again, it's one of those things you just got to get used to and be playing around with. If you're right-handed or left-handed, it's going to be different for you. I'm right-handed, so I like to hold my tape with my left, and so I can always mark with my right hand. If you're a lefty, you're going to be pulling it from this side and marking with your left, right? And so it all depends on which hand you are and just what feels most comfortable, but you want to get used to it. So again, you're used to manipulating and moving your tape so you can get the appropriate measurements and do your appropriate distances that you need. After watching this episode, you should know the basics of how to use a tape measure.
stay tuned for a future episode where we will be talking about the details of all these little markings and now how to read one. So have a great day in #1 Big Orange Country, and tune in next time for the next episode of Tool Time!